Hamdok begins mission to get his country off the US terror sponsors list. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts, live in Nairobi. Rama joins me now with all your business headlines.
Thank you very much, Karen. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. The third CGTN Global Media Summit and CCTV Plus Video Media Forum opens in Beijing. And we'll also explore why foreign investors have sold close to $10 billion worth of assets in South Africa. The details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Karen.
Thank you, Rama. At this hour, we will bring you live updates from locations around the world. In Hertfordshire, in the United Kingdom, Richard Bestick is following events around the NATO Leaders Summit. In Washington, D.C., CGTN's Giles Gibson is covering the House Judiciary Committee hearing of the Trump impeachment process. And in Cairo, Egypt, we have political analyst Sarah Kira with perspective on Sudan's new push to be removed from the terror sponsors list. Africa Live begins now. NATO alliance leaders have been meeting behind closed doors in Watford in Hertfordshire in the United Kingdom. And for details, we are now joined by Richard Bestick. Richard, it looks like there's been a bit of tension between the US President Donald Trump and a group of other leaders, including the Prime Ministers of the UK and Canada. What happened there?
Well, Karen, frankly, this entire two-day summit of NATO has been completely dominated by gossip and tensions and internal differences. The latest gossip from the fringes of the summit, Karen, is that US President Donald Trump has left the summit early and cancelled a press conference. So something's going on. Apparently, he accused the Canadian Prime Minister of being two-faced after he was caught mocking the US President on an open mic. Apparently, Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, the French President, and the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson were caught gossiping, allegedly about Donald Trump at a reception in Buckingham Palace last night. The Canadian leader was talking about Macron being late for the reception after Trump took a 40-minute press conference off the top, in the words of the Canadian Prime Minister. Trudeau is said to have made the most cutting of remarks, laughing about Trump's lengthy question and answer sessions with reporters and saying even the president's staff were shocked at some of his actions. Well, in a press conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel earlier today, the US President didn't look like he got the joke. He said Trudeau was two-faced. He said he became angry because Trump had confronted him about Canada's contributions to NATO's coffers. Have a listen.
Well, he's two-faced.
Do you think that Germany is too naive?
And honestly, with Trudeau, he's a nice guy. I find him to be a very nice guy. But, you know, the truth is that I called him out on the fact that he's not paying 2%. And I guess he's not very happy about it. I mean, you were there, a couple of you were there, and he's not paying 2%, and he should be paying 2%. It's Canada, they have money.
The relationship we have with the United States is an extraordinarily important and effective one. We have renegotiated NAFTA to be a better deal for Canadians, for Americans, and for Mexicans. We're moving forward on military collaborations. We're working together on the world stage on a broad range of things. And the relationship between Canada and the United States is extremely strong. And I have a very good relationship with President Trump and his team.
Well, away from that spat, the gossip there, Britain is asking NATO members to commit more money in order to keep the alliance strong for, they say, another 70 years. What are the other members saying on the future of NATO?
Well, this issue of money and donations to NATO's finances by the 29 member states is something that's been going on for 2 years. Donald Trump the US president has led the demands for all of the 29 members to make a contribution to NATO of 2% of their GDP, the gross domestic product. And many of the countries inside NATO haven't yet reached that level. So it's been an ongoing row inside NATO. Now, what has been promising today by Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, is that there will be an increase in payments of around $400 billion US. So the pressure is having some effect. The arguments, however, will continue. And as you suggested there, Karen, it's all about whether, after 70 years as the world's most powerful and most and lengthiest military alliance, whether there is a future for NATO. Money is one aspect, but they've also got to get over this sniping inside if NATO is to have a credible future.
Indeed, thank you very much for that. That was CGTN's Richard Bestick there, following the NATO summit for us in the UK. Well, the US House Judiciary Committee is holding its first impeachment inquiry hearing against President Donald Trump. 4 constitutional law professors are giving testimony today. We have our reporter Giles Gibson in Washington for us. Giles, what's the latest at this hour on the impeachment hearings over there?
Well, we've been hearing from 4 different legal experts, 3 of them chosen by the Democrats on the committee and 1 of them chosen by the Republicans on the committee. Now, the 3 experts chosen by the Democrats have all taken a pretty similar line, making a very similar argument that essentially President Trump committed impeachable offences in terms of his dealings with Ukraine and his subsequent actions. We've heard a very different story, though, from the witness chosen by the Republicans, Jonathan Turley. He's a law professor at George Washington University here in the US Capitol. He has really sought to try and undermine those arguments that President Trump committed impeachable offences. He said, and I'm quoting here, that these are the narrowest grounds ever used to impeach a president.
And Giles, what exactly is the House Intelligence Committee report accusing Trump of, and what charges could come of this if the process is approved by the House?
Yeah, we had the report from the House Intelligence Committee on Tuesday. They released it to the public on that day. And what it did was essentially outline its findings after those series of public hearings that we've seen over the last few weeks, with all sorts of different current and former Trump administration officials testifying to that committee. I'll just quote to you a little bit from that report. It said that the committee uncovered significant misconduct on the part of the President of the United States. What will happen now is, based on that report and also these hearings that we're going to be having in the House Judiciary Committee in the coming days, is that the House Judiciary Committee will then effectively issue articles of impeachment. And what those are essentially the charges that the committee, the Democrats on the committee, will be making against President Trump.
And Giles, finally, lay out for us the process. What are we likely to see in the coming days and weeks now?
Yeah, so as I was saying, we'll have those articles of impeachment from the House Judiciary Committee. We are then expecting the Democrats up here on Capitol Hill to push for a vote on impeachment by the end of the year, before Christmas. So that's a pretty tight time frame for the Democrats to get that vote in the House of Representatives. The next step would then be a trial in the Senate, something that we've only seen very few times in US history.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was CGTN's Giles Gibson for us there in Washington, D.C.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok is due to meet US officials on Thursday in Washington. Hamdok is pushing for Sudan's removal from the terror sponsors list, along with a lifting of sanctions. Sudan has been designated a sponsor of terror since 1993 over allegations that former President Omar al-Bashir's government was supporting terrorist groups. This means Sudan is technically not eligible for debt relief and financing from the IMF and the World Bank. So, how did Sudan end up on the US terror list? From Al-Qaeda to the Janjaweed, Sudan has been implicated with groups that have been classified as terrorist networks, and the numbers are staggering. Here's the story.
A young Colonel Omar al-Bashir overthrew the democratically elected government of Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi in 1989. By then, the conflict with southern rebels called Sudan People's Liberation Army had just entered its 6th year. Al-Bashir's regime inherited it. Al-Bashir's rise to power was backed by an Islamist cleric called Hassan al-Turabi. Al-Turabi was the then leader of the National Islamic Front, which successfully pushed for the imposition of strict Sharia laws in the Arab North. The party would later join the structures of Bashir's National Congress Party, which the new government is seeking to dismantle. The two politicians had what could be described as an interesting political ties. Sometimes the two would have fallouts. Al-Turabi was one of the people who would later play a leading role in convincing Khartoum to grant a safe haven to a terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda, which was then led by Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda had been formed by bin Laden in the aftermath of the war in Afghanistan. The group's first attack in the region was the August 1997 East African twin bombing of American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The conflict in the southern regions of Sudan was supported by various regional powers. In retaliation, the Bashir regime also allegedly sponsored various militias, including the Lord's Resistance Army and the Allied Defense Forces in Uganda, or ADF. ADF is still active in eastern DRC. The leadership in Khartoum was also accused of engineering a fallout within the SPLA, which saw Riek Machar form a splinter group which he named SPLM al-Nasir. Machar's outfit was later blamed for the 1991 massacres of the Dinka people of the present-day South Sudan. Unfortunately, bad blood between the two groups would later define a civil war that befell newly independent South Sudan, with the Nuer and Dinka fighting for supremacy. In 2003, a conflict broke out in Darfur and South Kordofan states of Sudan. It was spearheaded by Justice and Equality and Sudan Liberation movements. The two groups pushed for the rights of the majority black populations. To counter this, Khartoum was claimed to have sponsored and armed a local Arab militia called Janjaweed. Atrocities committed by the group would later form the basis of then-President Omar al-Bashir's indictment by the International Criminal Court at The Hague. These and other groups that enjoyed Khartoum's support were later designated as terrorist organizations by the United States. Others have since been dropped. Khartoum's choice to dance with these groups is the reason behind America's decision to list Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism, a move that the current Prime Minister is seeking to reverse. Penina Karibe, CGTN.
Well, for more perspective on this, we are now joined live from Cairo by Sarah Kira, a political analyst and director of the European North Africa Centre for Research. Thank you very much for joining us, Sarah. What will it mean for Prime Minister Hamdok if Sudan is taken off the US terrorism list?
Well, hi, and thank you for having me. Well, as Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok said or stated in front of the 74th session of the General Assembly, that the Sudanese people should not be or should not continue to be punished for a sin committed by a regime they toppled. Today, Sudan is upholding change and upholding democracy, a democratic change, as we like to call it, and it shouldn't be on the terror sponsors list, because it doesn't meet its aspirations and it doesn't help out in any way. If Sudan continues to be on that list, it would be very hard for them to gain any support from IMF or World Bank, as you mentioned, especially that they are in need of approximately $20 billion to boost their economy and to meet their people's needs.
So, Sarah, what do you think it would take for the US to agree to removing Sudan from this list?
Well, if there is an American will to remove Sudan from that list, it would be considered a domestic political gain for the U.S. leadership. It would bring back Sudan to the U.S. sphere and helps eradicate terrorism in this area, especially that Sudan has been playing a very important role in supplying terror groups with elements, Sudanese elements. And it's very important, if there is an American power, for Sudan to be back into a peaceful role in the region.
And obviously it's a change of regime now. In your opinion, have the threats from these militant groups reduced since the ouster of Omar al-Bashir from power?
It's very early to opinate about that, but today's leadership in Sudan is very promising, and they are willing to make the conflicts go away, especially the Darfur issue, and to come over the militias that are present in Sudan today. It's very early to say if this threat continues to be a big one or not, but today, after the ouster of al-Bashir, it might break, any conflicts over power might break any soon from those militias, especially that most of them were with the regime that the Sudanese people toppled, or al-Bashir's regime. If Sudan is not helped out in its stabilization, these breakouts in conflicts could be very soon. There is, as we speak, there is a lot of American forces on the ground in Sudan. We're talking about AFRICOM, we're talking about UN missions, UN peacekeeping missions. So if there is a will to finish the conflicts in Sudan and help it with its change that it's aspiring for, I think there are a lot of factors and elements to help on the ground for the Sudanese people, especially that the army as well needs to be reinformed, and the threat could be lessened as well when the army is reinforced and the UN missions are being active again in Sudan.
Okay, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Sarah Kira there speaking to us from Cairo. We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including... In Zimbabwe, 46 doctors returned to work after a 48-hour moratorium announced by President Mnangagwa. And experts give details of the long-acting injectable antiretroviral formulas being tested in some African regions.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's Let's now turn to Zimbabwe, with the ongoing doctors' strike entering its 4th month now. A few dozen medical professionals are now back at their posts. This comes after the government gave a 48-hour grace period last week for fired doctors to return to work. Over 400 junior doctors have been dismissed for protesting over low wages. CGTN's Farai Wakatuya has more.
While the 46 were back at work, the rest of their colleagues were escalating their strike by marching to deliver a petition to Parliament. Doctors hope that lawmakers can exert pressure on the government to act and bring an end to this protracted impasse whose impact has been nothing less than devastating. Several avoidable deaths have been reported at public hospitals where essential services have been scaled down as the over 2-month-long health crisis deteriorates. Even as the strike drags on, doctors are hopeful a resolution can be found out of behind-the-scenes negotiations which culminated in the presidential moratorium.
We appreciated the gesture and would love to be back at work. And once the remuneration part is addressed, we can come back to work and set timelines for other things to be addressed within a specific timeline.
The doctors want a salary linked to the rate of inflation, now in 3-digit territory, which has wiped out their earnings.
The reason why we have become incapacitated is because it has lost its buying power. We are not asking for an increment of our salary. We are asking for what we used to earn.
On Tuesday, Zimbabwe's health minister said government was in the process of addressing doctors' welfare through free housing and said procurement of essential drugs and equipment currently in short supply was being expedited. Farai Wakatuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Scientists are testing long-acting injectable antiretroviral formulas, which could change the way antiretroviral therapy is administered. If the trial is successful, HIV patients would no longer need to take medicine on a daily basis. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa now reports.
For millions of people living with HIV and AIDS, antiretroviral medication can actually be a dose of life. The treatment means they can lead normal, healthy lives. But after decades on medication, scientists note that fatigue is setting in, and many HIV patients struggle with the drugs which have to be taken at the very same time every single day for the rest of their lives.
For chronic diseases such as HIV, you always have challenges to take medications over and over. So, for example, if you've been on antibiotics just for 7 days, many people will tell you that they have forgotten like 2 days on their medicine. So imagine if you take medicine for 20 years and you have to take a pill every day. So plus the side effects of those medications.
That's where the idea of the injectable antiretroviral medication comes in, a discussion which brought researchers together at the ongoing International Conference on AIDS and STIs in Africa. The idea is to formulate a long-acting drug that can be injected in regular intervals of 4 to 8 weeks, giving patients a reprieve in between. It is technology that is closer than ever, as 2 pharmaceutical companies have submitted 2 drugs, cabotegravir and rilpivirine, for testing and approval. The combination of these 2 antiretrovirals has been shown to be just as effective as daily oral therapy, but the injectables are yet to be approved for general use, and researchers warn that even if the drugs pass every test, it could take up to 5 years before they are accessible to the public.
And this one is actually reaching the last stage, which is like pre-market. And there you can say, oh, I see it is coming. That's why the idea of very soon, or 2 years, 2 to 5 years, has been mentioned. But we always don't want to say to create false expectations.
Researchers want to find out what side effects, if any, the long-acting ARVs could have. The possible cost implications for such life-changing treatment are also still unclear. However, for millions, especially in Africa, where the majority of people with HIV and AIDS live, this development shines a ray of hope.
So long-acting to me, it's like that kind of boost or message to patients. Please, the few steps remaining, you're almost there, then you get that treatment.
It's another step forward in the fight against HIV and AIDS as the world searches for a cure. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN, in Kigali, Rwanda.
Somalia is on high alert following warnings on Tuesday of possible multiple cyclones hitting its coastline. According to meteorologists, the Indian Ocean is set to explode with tropical activity this week. On Monday, a tropical depression developed to the east of Somalia. The capital, Mogadishu, has been experiencing heavy downpours, which resulted in flash floods last week. The police have set up a hotline for people who find themselves in life-threatening situations. Meanwhile, the mayor of Mogadishu has put rescue services on standby.
We are expecting heavy downpour in the country in December, and in order to prepare for the possible impact of the rains on the residents in the city, we have put our emergency services on standby to respond across the Banadir region. We are now at the headquarters of the Banadir Emergency Services in Wadajir district, where all the municipal staff are ready to respond. We prepared all the rescue services vehicles, including the fire brigades and ambulances. Thus, we call upon the residents in Banadir region to contact the rescue teams whenever they encounter danger.
Well, over the past 20 years, nearly 500,000 deaths have been directly linked to extreme weather events. That's according to the environmental think tank German Watch. It's also just published a list of countries that suffer the most from extreme weather. CGTN's Daniela Pearson takes a look at the latest findings.
The 2020 Global Climate Risk Index analyzes the measurable impacts of extreme weather. This covers the cost to human life as well as the economic losses.
Between 1999 and 2018, all in all, more than 495,000 people died as a direct result of more than 12,000 extreme weather events. They led to losses that added up to more than $3.5 trillion.
The numbers show that worsening heat waves are affecting countries both rich and poor, with some of the most industrialized nations faring the worst.
The table shows the results for the year 2018, and we see that the countries that have been most affected in 2018 are Japan, the Philippines, and Germany. In 2018, different countries experienced exceptionally intense heat waves.
3 African countries are among the top 10 most affected. The index rated Madagascar as 4th, with Kenya taking 7th place and Rwanda taking 8th. In 2018, Madagascar was hit by 2 tropical storms in the span of 3 months. Cyclone Ava battered the island's coast in January, followed by Eliakim in March. 51 people were killed during Ava and 17 during Eliakim. Together, they were responsible for 70,000 people being forced to seek refuge. That same year, seasonal rains in Kenya and Rwanda were just as devastating. Kenya received double the normal amount of rainfall, with the country's major rivers bursting their banks, affecting 40 of the 47 counties. According to the report, this resulted not only in death, injury and displacement, but also the loss of livelihoods and livestock. Meanwhile, heavy rains in Rwanda caused flooding along the Sobeya River. The floods aggravated cholera cases, and there was also an epidemic of the mosquito-borne chikungunya virus. This latest climate data reconfirms earlier results. Less developed countries are generally more affected. But with countries like Japan and Germany topping the index, climate action would seem to be in the self-interest of all countries worldwide. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Well, now it's time for all the latest business news with Roma.
Thank you very much, Karen. Here's what's coming up in business. The 3rd CGTN Global Media Summit and CCTV Plus Video Media Forum opened up in Beijing. And foreign investors have cashed out of nearly $10 billion worth of South African assets.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. The third CGTN Global Media Summit and CCTV Plus Video Media Forum has opened in the Chinese capital. Under the theme Media versus Technology, this year's event is exploring new possibilities and disruptions brought about by tech to the media industry. Bringing you up to speed with the latest from that event, here's CGTN's Wu Guoxiu.
Co-hosted by CGTN and its content provider CCTV Plus and CGTNC, the summit welcomes 300 people from dozens of media organizations, tech enterprises, and think tanks from around the world. President Shen Haixiong of China Media Group calls on world media outlets to work for constructive contributions to global governance and human development.
Facing this complicated world, the function of global media should be constructive, not destructive. Media groups should push forward integration instead of intensifying disputes.
Shen launched the CGTN think tank, witnessed by 27 leaders of influential international think tanks. It aims to promote cooperation among global think tanks by building an open international platform for exchanges. Delegates from around the political world welcomed the move.
To sincerely hope and trust that the CGTN think tank as a media institute can not only develop guiding ideas to lead the trend, but also play an outstanding role in the process of deepening and expanding the understanding of China and the world by bringing together wise people from the world who care about China and the Chinese talents who are internationally minded.
Good information and insights, thoughtful analysis and debate, these are crucial, and these are delivered by CGTN and will in the future, I'm sure, be delivered by the new CGTN think tank. As a representative of, I would say, European citizens, wholeheartedly welcoming this important step and by looking forward to the future successful activities of your new CGTN think tank.
It's the third time that CGTN has hosted this summit, a platform for discussion among world media. This year, experts are addressing the unprecedented digital tech changes facing today's media. China Media Group says it has launched a 5G plus 4K and 8K plus AI strategy to effectively drive new media's development. It has opened the nation's first 4K channel and a first 5G-based new media platform, some significant steps in its media convergence. This afternoon, media and digital tech leaders are scheduled to explore the challenges and opportunities presented by the crossover of technology and broadcasting. CGTN think tank will also hold parallel discussions. While technologies change the way that media transmit their products, content is always at the core of what they have to offer. Wu Guoxiu, CGTN, Beijing.
Foreign investors have ditched over $9.6 billion worth of South African equities and bonds this year. That's according to the latest data from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, the report says that appetite for South African assets has been hurt by concerns in part about global growth, but just as importantly about the country's dire economic outlook. Chances of the country losing its last investment-grade credit rating have also risen, and that is acting as a big red flag to non-resident investors. South African stocks fell by 5.8% in the 3 months to the end of September. That was their worst third-quarter performance since 2011. And it's not just stocks that foreigners are selling. The cost of insuring exposure to South African sovereign debt via credit default swaps, or CDSs as they're more commonly known, has also been rising rather sharply. Still at the JSE, it recently hosted the African Exchange Linkage Project Forum. It's an association that aims to strengthen investment and increase cross-border trade in bonds and equities across African countries. That event was attended by executives from the JSE, the Egyptian Exchange, and stock exchanges in Nairobi, Nigeria, Mauritius, and Casablanca. Basically, all the big markets. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with more.
Most of the 27 African markets have been suffering with low liquidity issues in the past, and the forum got together to increase those levels, first by driving inter-African trade and then by attracting other foreign investors. They're using technology to do this.
We're going to have what we call a virtual hub, and it's going to be a virtual order entry system that will sit in the middle in the cloud potentially, but it will route orders between exchanges. So a broker in South Africa will take an order from his client to place an order in Egypt or Morocco or Kenya, and this order will be routed via the system straight into the system of the trader who has a relationship with in that market.
The 7 exchanges that are part of Phase 1 of the linkage project have all met the minimum criteria, which is focused on clearing and settlement times, money laundering legislation and market regulation. That leaves the 20 other exchanges and the need for capacity building there.
So in the meantime, we are working with those other exchanges so they're able to advocate and make changes in their markets to start meeting the criteria so they can, be part of this sort of footprint in Africa.
It's a grand plan. It's been years in the making, but it's likely to simplify access for traders into the affiliated African exchanges.
We will end up having a pan-African exchange or pan-African footprint where any investor globally could come in through any one of the exchanges and then have access to the rest of Africa.
With the JSE being the largest and most liquid exchange on the continent, it makes sense for its systems to be used to build that pan-African linkage that's going to be happening by the end of 2020. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Sandton, South Africa.
The telecommunications group MTN has criticised South Africa's Competition Commission's final report on its inquiry into the data market in South Africa. Now, the network operator says it will vigorously defend itself against overbroad and what it described as intrusive recommendations being made by the Commission. Now, according to the findings released on Monday, South Africa's competition watchdog intends to prosecute MTN and Vodacom if they do not cut what it described as excessive data prices by as much as 50% within 8 weeks. The regulator also wants all service providers to provide a free lifeline daily data allowance. Shares of MTN were roughly up 1.67% on Wednesday, but they have fallen by over 5% so far in the week. On to East Africa now. The Ugandan President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni has been leading a walk against corruption. He led thousands of walkers over a 3-kilometre route in the capital, Kampala. Top government officials, religious leaders, civil society campaigners, they all took part in this event. In the meantime, the head of state has announced the country's plans to tackle corruption. Now, despite having quite a few anti-corruption agencies, the issue still remains a widespread problem in Uganda, particularly in government institutions. According to the Ugandan Revenue Authority, the country loses over $53 billion a year just in illegal financial flows.
The laws are in place. I don't think there is any law we have not put on the statute books. The problem is with the implementation. And I think the mistake was in the recruitment into the office of the IGG and even this Nakarema's office and URA. Don't recruit people there on the basis of paper qualifications. Recruit people on the basis of integrity.
The International Conference on Sustainable Development and Sustainable Debt took place in Dakar in Senegal. The president of the country, Macky Sall, officiated the conference. There are several African heads of state in attendance as well. The managing director of the IMF, the United Nations Vice Secretary General and the Circle of Economists also were present at that event. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
This year's conference was attended by 6 African heads of state as well as ministers and representatives of international institutions from all over the world. The theme of the conference was finding the right balance between sustainable development and sustainable debt.
On the question of debt, Africa is no exception. In reality, the main obstacle to the continent is prejudice and the stigmatizing stance on Africa when it comes to investing in Africa. The perception of risk is always exaggerated. The ratings are exaggerated, which has for immediate consequence the increase of the rent of money and the rise naturally of the investment. The risk in Africa is not higher than in any other part of the world. I often say it, regardless of the difficulties, Africa pays its debt.
Et le renchérissement naturellement de l'investissement.
We theoretically can mobilize money at its real rent value if there's not a bad perception of risk. Today, I have unfortunately noticed in recent years that the IMF refuses to examine and assess the quality of the debt, which is to say that the quality of the investment that the debt wants to finance. We can make an investment that is profitable and that can generate wealth and income over the long term.
The managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, attended the conference, marking her first visit to Africa since her appointment. Georgieva emphasized the need to develop concrete and realistic proposals in making priority investments in Africa while containing the debt at a sustainable level. The IMF, the United Nations and the Investment Circle discussed the best ways to pursue the aspirations of African countries for a prosperous future. And we will see the role that debt could play and make it a positive rather than a negative role that affects the future of this continent. 2 out of 3 of the debt today consists of non-concessionary debts. So that means the costs of these debts, even with very low interest rates, is quite high. Borrowing is not a bad thing if done wisely. Countries can not only borrow as they wish, they should be managed in a balanced way so that they can find solutions. The meeting, now known as the Dakar Pact, was presented as an innovative roadmap aimed at accelerating economic growth in Africa and reaching an annual rate of 6% within 3 years. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
On to the business of infrastructure. Nigeria's transmission company secured a $220 million loan from the African Development Bank. That's part of a much wider $1.6 billion loan program. It should help the West African economy upgrade its ailing and largely not really functional transmission and distribution network. With the details, here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam.
Poor electricity supply. That's a major challenge for business owners like Raymond Unadike. For the past 17 years, keeping his printing business afloat has been a daily struggle. Raymond depends solely on his high-capacity generator to operate his machines. Several small, medium and large-scale businesses suffer the effect of constant power outages. Up to 50% of their earnings could go into running costly generators.
For the size of the generator I'm using, there's tendency for me to buy this up to 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 naira. Because I use a very big generator based on the size of my machines. They make it so expensive because something is supposed to do with 1 naira. Because of this, you ask more for more money. And customers, our clients are complaining.
Power generation has gulped over 80% of investments in the sector. Not as much attention has been paid to the transmission and distribution systems. In fact, more than 40% of electricity generated in Nigeria go to waste. Distribution companies lack the capacity to accommodate them. So the $210 million loan from the AFDB is much needed to begin a system overhaul.
First of all, to improve the electricity supply across these areas, these 7 areas, particularly from the south going to the north. I mean, south is where you have most of the good connections. If you go upwards to and up north, you see that connections are a bit sparse and they are unable to get to the consumer. In the northeast region, the closest power plant, it's about 1,000 kilometers or 1,000 miles away, which is a Shiroro power plant. So there's obviously not enough access to these areas.
From an average 6,000 megawatts, Nigeria set a target to boost power transmission wheeling capacity to 10,000 megawatts by 2020 and 15,000 megawatts by 2025. The $210 million loan from the African Development Bank is just a fraction of what Nigeria needs to overhaul the nation's electricity system. The entire master plan could cost nearly $2.24 billion. It's estimated that over a period of 20 years, Nigeria would need to spend up to $100 billion to get its electricity right. Constant electricity is a prerequisite for economic growth and development, so the country is looking to the World Bank and several other sources to fund the massive electricity projects. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Two quick stories to wrap up the segment. The Google CEO Sundar Pichai will replace Larry Page as CEO of the parent company Alphabet. This essentially extends a long retreat from public roles and active management by Page and Sergey Brin at the company they co-founded 21 years ago. Alphabet said that Page and Brin, however, will remain as directors of the company, but they will be giving up their CEO and president titles respectively with immediate effect. The company said the president role will not be filled. They're describing the changes as having been long discussed within the firm. Alphabet shares were up by about 0.6% following the after-hours announcement. Page, Brin and Pichai have all shared a very strong emphasis on developing more machine learning software to speed up web search and other tasks. A long-time product leader, Pichai has increased efforts to make such technology available globally to a lot more people. But that vision faces unprecedented scrutiny around the world. Governments on 5 continents are demanding better safeguards, less anti-competitive conduct and more taxes from the world's largest single online ad firm. And finally, Google has launched its Street View feature for Kenya's 21 national parks and 1 conservancy. The tech is expected to boost Kenya's tourism sector in part by encouraging visitors to these parks. Now, Street View essentially is a 360-degree ground-level imagery layer found on Google Maps. It allows users to remotely explore different places, landmarks, navigate around a trip, explore the streets of cities and towns, and to visit other places of interest around the world. In Kenya, imagery has already been published for major cities, towns, roads and a few other places of interest. But the latest capturing of national parks imagery should ideally position the country as quite a place for a destination for adventure. I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. A federal High Court judge in Lagos, Nigeria has ordered the seizure of one of Emirates' 777s following a long-running row between a Nigerian citizen and the carrier. What exactly happened and how is this going to be resolved? We'll have some answers for you live from Lagos at 1800 GMT. For now, back to Karen.
OK, thank you very much, Rama. We are going to a short break now. We've got all the sport coming up, including